Con voi tutti.
Convoy everyone! Today we are going to interview Esperide Ananas the author of 33 Lives from the Book of Time. So we are going to talk about past, current, and future lives, and we will try to explore this very interesting topic in research. Welcome everyone to our new interview. Today we are joined by Esperide Ananas and we're going to talk about her latest book, 33 Lives from the Book of Time, Stories and Science to Remind You Who You Are. So in this book, Esperide, we explore both the topic of past as well as present and future lives. And so this is really about your research dedicated to this past as well as present experiences, because also we have to mention this, there's maybe a revolutionary vision or idea of time and what time looks like. And so maybe I'd like to start by understanding how this research first started. Why did you decide to explore it? Well, thank you for this very interesting first question. I started this research dedicated to the lines of time with my lines of time, so with my timelines, during a moment of my life in which I did a series of exercises of meditation. And at some point, I received a message in my mind, which was memory. The memory, at least in my case, is something that activates lots of different things and always adds new extra steps and information. And so I said, okay, memory, if it's connected to a spiritual path, is probably not just about remembering things. It's probably about going and understanding what it means to explore the memory for us beings that are also hosts of the divine spark. And so I started to try and find a way to gain extra pieces of my experience in other points of time, in other moments of time, not necessarily to have more stories, but to have more density inside of myself, or to feel more density. And so from there, from this type of research, of course I was also helped by some people, and so I ended up using some Damanhurian techniques, and through the research that others did for me of my lives, this is something that opened memories for me, and it gave me flashes that I maybe received in other moments of my life when I was a teen, in different moments of my life. And so this gave me the opportunity to then gain memories. And then when I received these memories, I then entrusted them to someone else, other people here in Damanhur, that continued the research for me and confirmed them for me. And then after I received a stable of different lives, that's when I also started to understand inside me which were the real perceptions that were connected to another point of my presence in a different space-time, so in a different moment of time, and maybe which were the perceptions connected to other stories that I acquired as a consequence of the many influences, since in this time we're so constantly immersed by so many different signals, by other people's memories, by also fictional memories that we gain from movies and books and fiction. So one may also have a series of perceptions that, well, belong to all of these influences. But if something deeply moves us, even if it's not necessarily specifically our story, well, it still contains some aspects of it, some seeds of it. And so this is also something that I kept in mind when I started to write this book. The first part of the book, well, the book is a collection of 33 stories. So it's a collection of 33 lives of people that decided to research their other lives in different moments of time. And so these 33 lives, I think, they contain seeds that can help with the reawakening of memories, and especially with the reawakening of everyone's awareness, of whoever decides to read it. And so it's a path that follows a very specific structure. It starts from the idea of this moment in which we had just we were just this one common conscience. And then we also talk about how, in many ways throughout history, throughout different moments in time, men and women have tried to recreate this unity with different ways. And so no longer by using, for example, a telepathic connection, but in this case through love. And so then it's something that, of course, is explored in many different ways. And so these are not just, let's say, lives about love and peace and quiet. There's also, for example, a life of a young man, a soldier, that lives during the French Revolution and then decides to embrace the revolution and dies at a very young age, hoping that everything he was able to do, even the horror and the violence, are going to be useful to make the others advance and evolve, to make his people move closer to freedom, to a denser brotherhood and all the values that he had decided to embrace. And so this book, I think, is also a path of understanding. It's something that shows us how to leave the sense of judgment and the fact that love doesn't always manifest itself with hugs or kisses. Sometimes we have situations in our life that make us make some extreme decisions to defend our ideals and not lose that compass that we have inside us. I chose to write it right now, even though I've been thinking about it for many years. So I wrote it during our last lockdown. So I thought that I could take advantage of the lockdown and do something useful with it, but also because a lot of these lives that I ended up choosing, most of them, they really have the taste, this similar taste of the taste of times changing, the beginning of something new, which is very similar to what we are also going through today. And so the perception that I received, first of all, these stories, these lives are extraordinary lives. So I really recommend you to read it because in my case, they made me really emotional. They were extremely beautiful, and they also gave me this weird perception, this odd perception, which is a perception of expansion. So reading them, I noticed that even my perception of my current life is something that I can expand and continue to expand. And so even the perception that I have of myself, it's something that has changed because of these lives and because of this book. Also because you talk about alien experiences or connections with other forces and the elements, and so this is something that gave me a different perspective of my life. So it's one of the effects that I noticed. Yes, of course, well, the flow of life is a lot more interesting and it contains more surprises than we might think, and it's something that I think we all know, we all perceive, but again, we're in this moment of time that tries to always make us react. Instead of allowing us to expand, we tend to react, and every time we react, we tend to close more and more. And we repeat automatic reactions and automatic responses, and we always have to be for something and against something else. But if we learn how to expand, we can live in this paradox, because at the end of the day, everything is just one big paradox. Even time itself is one big paradox. And the interesting thing for me, the second part of the book talks about quantum physics and the neurosciences, because I wanted to complete this research, first of all, useful for myself and then for whoever wishes to read the book, but a research that can explain how we can truly understand today, the fact that it is possible to have contemporary lives, meaning lives in multiple points of time. Of course, that's a paradox, because from my point of view, I've had a life in ancient Greece, then that life, from my point of view, has already ended. But from the point of view of time as a container of this eternal present, in reality, that other version of myself is still there, still living. And so that means that there's a possibility to connect with that other piece of me, to heal that piece of me, or maybe I could decide to go there and take from there what I need today in this other current life. And I think that this, especially now, is one of the most important and interesting aspects of this research. It's not just to say, oh, how lovely, I was a pharaoh once, and to brag with your friends about being a pharaoh. Which, by the way, in my experience, the historic lives of kings and queens, they're awful, terrible. They're lives filled with pain and not a lot of freedom, so very difficult ones. And so you also tend to reevaluate other things, and you reevaluate other values, because maybe a fisherman's life, so deeply connected with nature, becomes a cosmic life, while in the stupid way we used to think sometimes, we just see it as something very simple and apparently insignificant, and that's not the case, of course. So the idea of once again becoming aware that we're also in other moments of time is something that enriches us, and It also adds more lenses, more filters that then we can use for the glasses that we use to look at reality. So like the glasses that you're wearing, different lenses, yellow, purple, pink ones, it's still always you, but you can just notice different things that are already inside you. We have perceptions and emotions. Everything that we have inside of us is something that also we've already experienced. So we contain all of these memories. They are contained in the point in which we have awareness. Yeah, and I'll tell you even more than that, they are contained in the body. So from my experience, what I can say is that our cells remember. So oftentimes I'm very surprised when I am able to do this dynamic connected to food of how much perfume, scents, food can really bring us in other moments of time, and it's an extraordinary thing when I start to establish this very deep connection with the trace of memories that's in the cells. Then everything that becomes of the senses, so everything that's part of the senses, is something that helps you. And so in my experience, when I help and guide through these processes and these dynamics, they're not just meditations in which you have to remain still. Of course, there's also that part that opens the field, that establishes the connection. But then the memory, the communication, the dialogue is entirely something that you do with emotions, perceptions, and the senses. And it's always something that we do thanks to the senses, and the magic is in this connection. So then, also for those that are watching this interview, maybe they're going to wonder how this process happens. How do you reawake these memories? Also because at the end of your book, you talk about your experiences of when you were in Greece. And so maybe it's something that can happen spontaneously, or is it something that happens by also doing some guided paths or dynamics or meditation? So can you tell us something about this? Yes, so for what concerns Damanhur's path, for many years we have decided to not use hypnosis, so to make the people that do this research the real protagonists. So they do this research themselves, they activate this communication with this other version of themselves. And so we have two main methods. The first one is the method that through a research that's done here, so you send me a picture and then you also give me your name, surname, and date of birth, and then a specialized group of people, they start this research after you give them, of course, your permission to, because when you send us your picture and these other information, you're basically giving them the possibility to start this research. And so this group of people that also follows a very specific system and a series of instructions, everything that has also been turned into a ritual, well, they start this research and they go and see, and they choose between the many different reincarnations, so between the many different points of time in which that person still lives, they choose the one that is important for them to remember right now. So if you do this path, if you use this method today, and then if you do it again 10 years from now, you might discover different lives, because maybe right now you need to meet someone, and then in 10 years you'll have to meet someone else. And so this is a method, a path on many different levels. We've been offering it in Damanhur for many years. And then more recently, and this too is a specific thing that I do as one of the teachers that teaches it, since we have also established as Damanhur, let's say, some preferential ways between people's timelines, we can also guide them and allow them to go through these timelines themselves. We have then created this other method, and through this other method, in my case, since I'm one of the teachers, I help people find these points themselves. I don't do the research for them, but I just open this field for them and I guide through different steps. And I know that these are the fundamental steps to be able to allow that person to once again, let's say, embody that body, to embrace those thoughts, of course, for a certain moment of time. Now, this is not just a process that happens randomly, also because with the first method, I said that we go and select the life that in this moment of your life is necessary for you to remember. And it's very similar in this other second method. So the first initial part that we go through is what establishes and, let's say, selects the version of you that you now need to meet, that's useful for you to meet. Of course, you have to know why you want to do this and So maybe the people that already have received, let's say, flashes of images, can they arrive with their suggestions, with their flashes? Of course, if they arrive with their flashes, then we also tend to ask them, what's the emotion attached to this flash? Because if you wish to explore it in more details, you probably have three different possibilities. Either one, you wish to explore it in more details because you believe that this type of experience is something that's maybe creating them some discomfort. So imagine that you have a radio that constantly continues to create interferences. And now you want to understand the channel that creates these interferences and you want to turn down the volume, or maybe it's the exact opposite. These are flashes of creativity and flashes of special moments of bliss, and so one may think, okay, now despite the chaos of my life, every now and then I am able to live this type of perception, and so I want to turn up the volume, I want to feel it more. And then the third possibility is when this flash arrives, it's loud and clear, but I'd like to stabilize the system. Usually, of course, this tends to happen with positive flashes. So you feel that you have enough intensity, it's a wonderful thing, but then it tends to disappear, or you don't really know when to attract it on purpose. So if these are the goals, and they are also connected with the perception that these answers are kept somewhere else in time because you cannot find them here, then this is enough to create the right timelines that then lead to the right doors to these experiences. Of course, always supported in this process by the selfic technology, so by the connection with a field of intelligence that's a protected and safe environment, a safe field, and so an experience that truly helps with this selection. So the person puts their will and also puts the lucidity, and they have a very clear goal and object in mind. And then we also have a way to activate a series of tools that then connect the person to this big field of intelligence and selfic intelligence, for example, the temples of humankind. And this again represents a safe environment with no other disturbances or interferences, and allows to find exactly what the person is looking for without wasting time. So first of all, thank you for this explanation, because it's a very popular question that we receive often. How? And then also you just mentioned being able to feel that it's an authentic thing, that it's not just a consequence of influences. And then I want to ask you, when we talk about the Book of Time, what do we mean with it exactly? What is this Book of Time that exists? Is it something that we can contact? Okay, well, it's a big chapter that we have to explore, but we know that all the different experiences, and I'm talking about the experiences of all the different beings, from a leaf to any other type of being, they're all, let's say, recorded. And so in this big archive, there's also the map and the Book of Time, the one for all of us. So it represents the map, the unique map that you are, of course, connected with the rest of space-time that gives life to the forms and the matter that we know. So you just said gift. Now, by reading the different lives of this book, and I'm sure that you'll notice this too, some characteristics tend to emerge. And they're very strong identities, also very specific talents. In some cases, they almost look like superpowers, so very incredible things. And this is this very strong identity. Is it part of this process? Or maybe what is the bigger picture? So why in these existences we have such strong talents and powers that maybe we then carry with us from life to life? So for example, there's this life of the scientist that decides to reprogram the next experience and comes back as a man and remembers their talent. And of course, there's someone with a specific level of lucidity to be able to even think about doing something like this. But these talents, is there also a connection between these talents, like a connection that then we bring with ourselves from life to life? First of all, you mentioned one of the very interesting lives. This is the story of a scientist from Atlantis. Now, this is because not all the lives that are in this book belong to, let's say, the space-time that we know. And so there's also some of these lives that are maybe challenging a bit, let's say, that say, what if? And what if there was actually a different, let's say, historical cycle? What if this is possible. So that particular life is very interesting, and your question is very interesting too, because there's always this little bit of humor that makes us think that there is probably another even bigger picture. So this scientist programs himself to come back with all the codes useful to come back as a man. So I'm talking about the hormonal codes, mental codes that work on this specimen, male specimen of the human species. And then the scientist, when finally reincarnates, comes back in the body of a woman. So at first is a bit surprised, but then understands that there is even a bigger picture. And so there's a limit to the control that as humans we can have and we can establish, and everything else that the rest of the destiny offers us are just extra notes that we can decide to play with. But anyways, the idea is that we are none of these reincarnations, that we are the knot of awareness from which this transmission starts, and the transmission is always the same one in all of these different points of time. Let's use the example of the radio. My radio app there always transmits 96.5 hertz. And it remains the same in different points of time, but it's always the same frequency. So what does that mean? It means that maybe in a life, let's say that this is a radio connected to innovation. Maybe in one life, this frequency is something that I transmit because I decide to participate in the revolution. In another one, I'm a scientist. In a different one, I'm a teacher that thinks about a new way of teaching and of establishing connections. And in another life, I'm a chef that creates a different way to connect with food. It's always innovation, different shades of it, but the frequency is always the same one. So the transmitter is always the same one, but in all of these existences, I explored it in different ways. And I continue until I've explored all the possible different shades, from the most interesting one to the most boring ones, until this frequency becomes so saturated. Maybe with the example of a color, it becomes easier to understand. So let's say, well, in the book I use the color blue. So I'm blue, but how many different shades of blue exists? And in each life I get to explore a different shade of this blue, and I, of course, transmit the message, but I also receive something in return, and eventually I'll be able to transmit my existence, and I'll be able to put all of these different shades together and recreate the color blue. I think that this is how, let's say, the awareness of the whole of humankind is something that we'll be able to once again reunite. So this is it something that also moves us a little closer to the concept of enlightenment or not? How do you see this? Because this reconnecting, this uniting, does it also have something to do with the concept of enlightenment? So in our spiritual school, we tend to differentiate between enlightenment and what we call metamorphosis. Let's say that the enlightenment is an intermediate state or a state in between.